Back in 2006, I came here. I met some people, some Americans. They took me to the Move On retreat before the midterm elections. It was all kind of private thing for the Democrats. They were already massive. They were about to become even more massive. And they basically explained, like kind of sitting on top of a mountain listening to the sage, how simple the Move On model is and how incredibly amazingly effective it is. And I then came back and gave back 50 speeches at conferences where I said, someone has to come here and they will basically destroy or eat the lunch of centre-left kind of NGOs that already exist. And I'm so glad 38 Degrees finally came along and finally did it, because it was obvious for a couple of years before 38 Degrees set up that someone was going to do it. Avaz did it in the international space, GetUp did it in Australia.
I'm not sure we're destroying or eating lunches, though.
There will be progressive NGOs that will be smaller because you get bigger, and that just seems almost inevitable to me, and not necessarily something to lament. One weird thing that happened though here was that during that period of time, when the government was left wing, was that the right wing here didn't get it. They were obsessed by blogs, right? Having sat at this kind of feet of the gurus, it was incredibly obvious to me that all they had to do was basically take the Move On playbook, dust it off, reproduce the same thing, and they'd have 3 million people on their mailing list who could be got to do anything. But they were so obsessed by blogs as a kind of like, this is what the right-wing internet means, that they didn't do it. Now the secret's out. There's been some big elections in Britain and America. The government in both countries has switched sides a couple of times. Now we're into an arena where everybody knows what it's like. Everybody knows what it takes. And the Tea Party is basically the kind of part of the manifestation of that, as are other right-wing American groups. Within Britain, 38 Degrees is that manifestation. So we're going to see a fascinating arms race where both sides can do it just as well. And the kind of the one-off historical advantage where only the Move On people knew the magic sauce in the book, or only the 38 Degrees people knew the special sauce, that's going to, within 5 years, that will look like ancient history. And so the intriguing thing that happens, what happens when there's 2 or 3 massive, incredibly well conversion track campaign groups, possibly none of which existed before about 2008, that become the big dominant campaign groups on the left and the right in most developed countries. This is a really fascinating question. It relates to what you're saying about the legitimacy in the space, because I know of 3 startups in America that are all about the fact that the politicians there just literally can't cope with the mail anymore, and it's about replacing that mail interface, just saying we politicians need you to use some other thing that means we can sort of tell who you are in some way, because we're just at this point taking all the mail and throwing it away, or we're looking at the little number at the top, we're weighing it up against a lot of other enormous numbers that reflect how big the emails are, and we're basically, and politics carries on as normal. It's just instead of the opinion poll numbers we used 5 years ago, we now have these numbers that represent 10 million emails in our boxes that we haven't read. These startups are coming into the space to say, maybe we just shouldn't be using email for that. Maybe if it's all about the like 10 million people think this, 6 million people think that, maybe actually we can bypass that process, and maybe also we can have more credibility that 3 million of those 6 million aren't some teenager with a really good mailing script. And so on the Monbiot point, I think that kind of, will there be a space for kind of legitimacy? I think what we're going to see is as everyone gets better and better and better at being 38 Degrees, the premium for being 38 Degrees will relatively go down, and there will become special new startups and NGOs that exist only to be the thing that isn't like that. They're not here yet. We're only seeing the beginnings of that. But I think a world in which there are 10 38 Degrees on each side of the political spectrum is one in which, as Mr. Monbiot suggests, you have to carve out special spaces where there's a much higher level of verification about who people are or whether they're speaking the truth, because otherwise the noise is just going to get so great that nothing's going to mean anything at all.